This is a case of a 42-year-old woman who was admitted at a hospital with an 8-hour history of right upper quadrant and epigastric pain radiating through the back, associated with nausea and 3 episodes of vomiting. She had a past medical history of multiple episodes of the similar pain in the right upper quadrant over the past 6 months, noted postprandially or after meals which last for several hours. She has had intentional weight loss of 19 kilograms over the past year, giving her a BMI of 28. She had no other pertinent medical and surgical history, and there's no maintenance medications taken. On bedside examination, she was alert but noticeably in pain despite 10 milligrams of IV morphine. Her vital signs are the following. Pulse rate was 100 beats per minute. Blood pressure was 135/80. Respiratory rate was 18 counts per minute. And temperature is 37.8 degrees Celsius. Upon focus examination, there was no clinical evidence of jaundice or chronic liver disease. Upon focus abdominal examination, the abdomen was soft with no palpable masses. However, she was tender in the right upper quadrant and epigastrium on palpation. The patient was also positive for a Murphy's sign. Other organ systems were unremarkable. Blood samples were taken and shown the following results. Now to dissect this case and learn, we have the following questions to answer together in this video. Number 1, what will be our important differential diagnosis in this case? Number 2, how do gallstones form? Number 3, what is the pathophysiology of gallstones? Number 4, what laboratory and imaging workup should you request and how it will influence your management? Number 5, what are the possible complications of a gallstone disease? Number 6, how should our patient be managed? Number 7, when is surgery indicated? At this point, we highly encourage you to pause the video and answer the following questions by yourself. And if you are done, you can play the video and you can check your answers with the correct ones. Question number 1. What will be our important differential diagnosis in this case? Firstly, we have to point out our salient features in this case. So my salient features are the following. A 42-year-old woman with an 8-hour right upper quadrant and epigastrium pain radiating to the back. Secondly is a nausea and 3 episodes of vomiting denoting inflammation. Past history of the same pain over the past 6 months, postprandially and lasting for several hours denotes biliary colic. There's no other medical and surgical history, and there was a history of an intentional weight loss, 19 kilograms over the last 12 months. Her vital signs were noted to be elevated, especially her pulse, temperature, respiratory rate, and the fact that this patient was in pain despite the analgesia. Her physical examination showed negative jaundice, no liver disease noted, and her abdominal examination showed tender abdomen and a positive Murphy's sign with no masses. Her lab results finding also showed elevated WBC, CRP, and slightly elevated ALP and prothrombin time. Now, our top differential diagnoses are the following. Number 1 is biliary colic. Number 2 is acute cholecystitis, duodenal ulceration or perforation, and acute pancreatitis. This lady's preceding history of episodic right upper quadrant pain increases the likelihood of a gallstones disease or a cholelithiasis. Now the question is, why would the gallbladder become affected with a seemingly formed gallstones? Is it normal? Now, what is the function of a gallbladder? What is a bile? Question number 2. How do gallstones form? Bile consists of bile salts, water, cholesterol and fats, phospholipids, mucus, and inorganic salts. These salts are very important in digestion and absorption of fats, as well as fat-soluble vitamins, while it also excretes waste products such as bilirubin and cholesterol. Because of the nature of the bile, it causes the phospholipid and cholesterol vesicles to be incorporated into mixed micelles, which maintains the cholesterol in solution. Now, if there's an imbalance between the lipids and salts in your body, gallstones are thought to occur, leading to supersaturation and precipitation into crystals. The gallstones generally consist of cholesterol, calcium, or a mixture of the two, or what we call them mixed stones. Predominantly speaking, over 80% of the stones are cholesterol, where it is also due to the fact that too much high amounts of cholesterol can precipitate it, leading to cholesterol stones. On the other hand, calcium stones can also occur when there's a precipitation of calcium with unconjugated bilirubin, usually from hemolysis. Bacteria can also cause calcium stones to occur when they hydrolyze conjugated bilirubin into unconjugated bilirubin, which can cause precipitation into a pigmented black stones through bilirubin oxidation. The bacteria can also lead to the formation of a less common brown pigment gallstones, where the fatty acid byproduct of bacterial hydrolysis of lecithin can precipitate with calcium. Now, how about mixed gallstones? These gallstones will form when the cholesterol and the calcium bilirubinate stones will form together, where it is also colonized by a bacteria, leading to a mixed gallstones. Now, what are the usual risk factors of having a gallstones? Female gender, obesity, pregnancy, estrogen-containing medications, and gallbladder stasis, to include Crohn's disease, an inflammatory bowel disease, and a history of ileal resection, and ileal disease because of the fact that it decreases bile salt reabsorption or the enterohepatic circulation, which can all result to a gallstone formation. Question number 3. What is the pathophysiology of a gallstone's disease? Gallstone can produce disease within the gallbladder and can cause pain, inflammation, or infection. This occurs when there is a gallstone formation within the gallbladder or as a result of stone migration out of the gallbladder into the biliary system. If the gallstones is within the lumen, this can transiently obstruct the gallbladder neck or the cystic duct to give the features of biliary colic without overt features of inflammation. This consists of a constant right upper quadrant to epigastric pain that is self-limiting to a period of several hours with associated features of nausea and vomiting. Now, these gallstones can also become impacted in the Hartmann's pouch, which results in continuous secretion of mucus from the gallbladder mucosa while the bile is resorbed by the gallbladder. The gallbladder becomes over-distended with a transparent wall called the mucocele, which may or may not be associated with generalized inflammation of the gallbladder. Now, these stones can also cause acute cholecystitis by generating direct mechanical irritation of the gallbladder wall, particularly in the presence of a biliary sludge, which is a mix of smaller particular crystals precipitated from the bile. Now, due to the gallstones causing mechanical trauma to the gallbladder wall, it will cause to release prostaglandins I2 and E2, which will result in an inflammatory response. Please take note of the difference between the pain of the cholecystitis and the biliary colic mentioned earlier, where the main difference is the severity and persistency. Now, the pain of cholecystitis is of similar nature to biliary colic, but is generally described as more severe and persistent, which can occur hours to days and is typically associated with a fever. Also, a positive Murphy sign, which is a pain on palpation of right upper quadrant, causing the patient to catch their breath during deep inspiration, which is absent in the left upper quadrant pain. Just take note of the term mid-inspiratory arrest. Take note that the sign is sensitive but not specific to the condition and can often be absent in the elderly and in acalculous cholecystitis. Also take note that acute cholecystitis is primarily an inflammatory rather than an infectious process, but about 50% of patients with acute cholecystitis have secondary bacteriobilia. Most commonly is the Escherichia coli and also the Klebsiella, especially when they colonize the cholesterol stones that have formed in the gallbladder and can cause superimposed infection. Also, a significant finding in the past medical history that is also a part of the pathophysiology is the diabetes mellitus. Especially these patients are already immunocompromised, so these organisms like the E. coli, Clostridia perfringens, and Klebsiella are gas-producing organisms and they can occasionally invade the gallbladder wall and generate gas, resulting in emphysematous cholecystitis. This occurs in 1% of cases, and yes, it is more common among diabetic patients, and they also have a higher risk of perforation and gangrene, and urgent cholecystectomy is usually warranted for these patients. Now, another gallstone disease is the acute acalculous cholecystitis, which accounts for about 5 to 10% of all cases of acute cholecystitis. In the name alone, acute acalculous means no stones, but it can cause cholecystitis. So, how does this occur? It usually occurs in critically ill patients after trauma, burns, long-term parenteral nutrition, and major non-biliary operations like abdominal aneurysm repair or cardiopulmonary bypass. The cause of acute acalculous cholecystitis remains unclear, although gallbladder stasis with increased bacterial colonization and ischemia have been implicated. Now, we know that the severely ill patients are predisposed to biliary stasis or to have acute acalculous cholecystitis because they have dehydration and they have a lack of gallbladder stimulation from the cholecystokinin or the CKK, where they are not able to receive enteral nutrition, so they will develop this acute acalculous cholecystitis. Question number 4. What laboratory and imaging workup will you request, and how it can influence your management? The following tests are usually requested for this kind of patient. So we usually order blood tests like full blood count, C-reactive protein, liver profile, amylase, lipase to rule out pancreatitis, and clotting screening like PT, PTT, and INR. We order the following tests in order to detect the elevated inflammatory markers or fever in the presence of clinical signs are already diagnostic criteria for acute cholecystitis. Blood cultures are also sent in pyrexia or febrile patients to seek an infective organism. As I have said a while ago, serum amylase or lipase must be used in acute cases to assess for acute pancreatitis, which can occasionally present in a similar manner such as the cholecystitis. Take note that the amylase peaks quickly and can normalize within 24 hours, whereas your lipase remains elevated for several days. Plain chest and abdominal radiographs are not useful diagnostic tests, but it can make other diagnoses or detect other complications such as your pulmonary infiltrates, ileus, bowel obstruction, and pneumoperitoneum from a perforated viscus. Also, calcified gallstones can occasionally be seen on the x-rays, but only in about 10% of cases. Next in line is the ultrasonography, as this is one of the first-line investigation which can reveal the presence of gallstones and identify dilatation of the biliary system from gallstones obstructing the common bile duct. Well, it can also confirm the diagnosis of cholecystitis by revealing a thickened gallbladder wall of over 4 millimeters. Now, MRI, or commonly what we call magnetic resonance cholangiopancreatography or MRCP, may be required to further investigate any biliary dilatation seen on the ultrasound or CT, as well as deranged liver function tests. This can detect bile duct stones with a high degree of accuracy. Next in line is the endoscopic ultrasound, which can be used where the gallstone disease is clinically suspected but where the ultrasound and MRI does not reveal stones. Now, CT scan or computed tomography is occasionally used when there is only diagnostic uncertainty for the pathophysiology seen in the patient, or if you need a more global assessment like if the patient is having suspected gallstone ileus. Now, okay, for our patient, the imaging of this lady's gallbladder revealed multiple gallstones and biliary sludge in a thick-walled gallbladder and confirmed the diagnosis of cholecystitis. Question number 5. What are possible complications of gallstones? It could be the following, so it could be acute cholecystitis, acute pancreatitis, ascending cholangitis, so please remember the triad of Charcot, which is the fever, right upper quadrant pain, and jaundice. You can also have obstructive jaundice when the stones migrate into the common bile duct, and you can also have gallbladder empyema, which can develop sepsis, and gallbladder perforation, especially if there is ischemia, gangrene, and perforation, which is more commonly associated with a calculous cholecystitis. Now take note, the perforation can transiently elevate the patient's symptom, but as usual, it can lead to peritonitis if not properly seen. Also, cholecystoenteric fistula, when there is a repeated attacks of inflammation, the gallbladder can adhere to another bowel like your duodenum or transverse colon, and then perforation will decompress the gallbladder, which will effectively drain the infected fluid. So we should be suspicious for a perforation where there is a presence of pneumobilia in the radiological investigation. Gallstone ileus is also a must to be take note of. So those are the possible complications of a gallstone's disease. That is why we should not take this lightly. Question number 6. How should this patient be managed? Firstly, we have to rehydrate the patient via intravenous line. Make sure to calibrate it accordingly to the patient's vital sign status as well. We don't want our patient to be overhydrated or underhydrated. Next is to give broad-spectrum antibiotics and further guided by results of the blood culture. It must be administered intravenously in the presence of a raised temperature or a systemic upset like vomiting and fever. Also, don't forget your regular analgesia to remove or to alleviate the pain of the patient. Remember that pain control is one of the most important part of management in our surgical patients. Next is urgent abdominal ultrasound, and next will be MRCP or ERCP, especially when we have seen an abnormal biliary from the initial imaging that we have ordered. Of course, consideration for cholecystectomy should commence. Following presentation with symptomatic gallstones, there is a 50% risk of a further episode of biliary colic per year, and there's a 1 to 2% risk of developing a more serious gallstone-related complication. Now, if the patient is fit for surgery, why not give cholecystectomy, right? We recommend it. Now, non-surgical options are not very effective, but in those unfit for surgery, oral treatment with ursodeoxycholic acid may help the solution of the stones. So our patient was appropriately managed and was responding appropriately. Question number 7. At what stage should surgery be considered? Urgent surgery is not clinically indicated for biliary colic. Although earlier intervention does reduce readmission with further symptoms or complication, and is a cost-effective measure. Now, early laparoscopic cholecystectomy within 3 days of the onset of symptoms is a treatment of choice for acute cholecystitis unless there are contraindications. Patients whose gallstones do not cause symptoms rarely require cholecystectomy. However, patients with or without symptomatic gallstones should undergo cholecystectomy if they are found to have a porcine gallbladder or anomalous pancreatico-biliary union. So this is the usual laparoscopic cholecystectomy setup where the surgeons will insert ports in order to visualize your gallbladder and to aid the dissection of the gallbladder properly. Our surgeons perform it very well because they have this critical view of safety that they employ. It is where they first identify the cystic duct and the cystic artery, as we can see here in the image. Now, if our patient is presenting with pancreatitis alongside with gallstone disease, they should ideally be operated in the index admission or within 2 weeks of the acute episode. Now, immediate cholecystectomy has been shown to be safe with shorter length of stay and lower complication rates than delayed surgery. Now, our patient was operated properly and there was no complications after the surgery and was sent home when she was stable. Our clinical pearls for this case are the following. Presence of gallstones is fairly common, however, patients with symptomatic gallstones need to be treated. Secondly, abdominal ultrasound is a diagnostic study of choice, but we can also opt for other imaging if indicated. Patients with acute cholecystitis should undergo cholecystectomy early during their hospital stay. And lastly, identify the critical view of safety to prevent bile duct injury. This is the 10 problem-based cases learning in surgery, episode 1, gallstones. I hope that you learned a lot in this approach and may we see you again next time.